welcome to another episode with Bourbons with Bert. My guest today is Skye Miller, a Director of Client Accounts at Protis Global. And by the way, it's ironic, we have the same last name.
We do. We do.
Yeah,
that is weird.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super common last name.
It is kind of like Smith or
Right, or
Johnson.
Yeah,
Jackson.
oh yeah,
Jackson.
that was good.
It was good. All right, so today, and we always kick off, well today we're going to talk about interviewing, but before we do that, we always kick the show off with a toast. And so I'm going to toast with the bourbon since the namesake of the show is Bourbons with Bert. You're drinking a rosé.
Yeah,
Looks like silver rosé.
it does. Cheers.
Cheers. All right, topic for the day,
Yes.
interviewing.
Yes, it's very important.
It is very important. I agree with you. So, if somebody's getting ready to go interview with a company, what are the top 3 to 5 tips in terms of them preparing to get ready to go meet somebody?
Yeah, first and foremost, they should do research on the organization. We're providing information of the company and the client we're working with, but they need to go do their due diligence, come to us, ask questions, clarifying questions of anything that they need answered prior to going in, so they feel armed and ready to know what they're talking about. They need to do research on themselves. It's a business conversation about themselves, and they need to go into the meeting understanding the impact that they've made in each of the roles and to their organizations that they've been in prior. So those would be 2, and then the third one would be to kind of tied into the second, but making sure that their communication is very concise and direct, meaning this is how it impacted the organization, and not getting into a rambling long story about how this is how it happened, but really here's the situation that occurred, here are the action steps I took, and here are the quantifiable results that happened in the process.
So SAR.
SAR.
Absolutely.
But I didn't know if our audience knew what SAR meant.
Situation,
Action.
result.
Yeah.
It's not even a real word.
No, we made it up.
We did make it up. Okay, so would you also say that you're a former athlete?
I am.
So would you say visualizing themselves in the role, like an athlete would visualize their next shot or their next swing or whatever they do,
Yeah.
is important?
Yeah.
So visualize yourself in the role.
Yes.
How would you do that if you're a candidate?
So if you're a candidate, working closely with your recruiter, understanding what the role is really going to entail, and understanding those SARs of what you have done and how those are applicable to this particular position, and being able to talk to that and then write your questions that you have around that. So that's how I would visualize it going in.
Okay, so stay with SARS real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Situation, action, result. So if you're going to role play with me, and result meaning quantifiable, right?
Correct.
So we want to quantify dollar cent, growth, percentage increase, dollar saved, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to give me an example of a role play of a situation, action, result, what would you say?
Sure. So from a candidate's perspective, of candidates that I work closely with, I would say, currently I'm leading a team over the convenience channel, and our team has grown that channel, 16% over the last 2 years. That's very high, I get it. And because of that, we're able to have X number of growth and volume for the whole organization. And that's the impact that they've made to the whole organization.
Got it. Outstanding. So, staying with the interview, and what are some pitfalls? And we talked about blunders. We talked about blunders at the beginning. That
Yeah.
those things happen. And when you have humans and humans talking, things happen. But if you think about preparing for the interview, what are things that go wrong in interviews, or things that you could prevent from going wrong in interviews?
A lot of things that I've seen go wrong when people talk too much, but where they really get started in talking too much is when they'll come into the interview and the interviewer may not be great at interviewing either, right? Because we had to prep our clients. I'm sure that's a different topic. But when they come in and say, "Tell me about yourself,"
Right.
candidates sometimes, people like talking about themselves, so they tend to ramble, and then by the time you know it's 25 minutes later, and they don't have much to talk about on the actual organization and the role.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So when somebody asks you that danger question, tell me about yourself, at the end of the day, it's really, and what I like is you start your senior in high school and how you made a quick decision, or how you made a decision, you can go through that quickly relative to your college selection, why you chose your major, after you came out of school, why you selected the company that you worked for, or came to work for after school. And if you made a couple different changes, articulate very quickly why you made those changes. The reason I say that, and you get there, you do that in about 2.5, 3 minutes, is that then you give the interviewer a chance to stop and dig in and ask the questions based off that. When you try to just, do a data dump, that's when you kind of lose the interviewer.
Yeah, and then, absolutely. And then that also allows the interviewer or for you to read the interviewer and see what they're really interested in, where you can take the conversation for that next hour that you're talking, where they really slow you down.
Right. So when early on you said something about preparing yourself and knowing what you're going to talk about. Talk to me a little bit about how the candidate would develop their narrative or their own story.
Sure. About their experience?
Well, if you're going to go do a commercial on you.
I see. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I think your example was good. I think it depends on where they are in their career. If they're super senior in the industry and have been working for the last 30 years, starting back at college and, the transition from each move and promotion might be a little much. So maybe tailoring that down to a move from company to company, right? Versus, I was promoted 4 or 5 times within this organization, and here's why I made the move to the next organization. I think that would cut it down and get it within that 2.5 to 3 minutes versus each individual role.
Got it. So if you take how long have you been a Protis now?
6 years next month.
Next month, 6 years. I'm glad you gave me a reminder for the anniversary.
Yeah, 14 days.
We'll make sure Richard sends something to remind us. Okay, so 6 years. You've gone through a lot in terms of the 6 years.
I have.
So if you think about that, and you mentioned people talk too much.
Yes.
They get nervous in an interview, so they just ramble, or they go, and then to gather their thoughts, that kind of thing. Other things where people get tripped up and they really hurt themselves in an interview. Because the reason I ask the question is that there's many people that have these skills and experiences, but culturally and or how they connect to the interviewer, they don't get the job. And there's other people who have 60% of the skills and experiences, and things click and they get the job. So there's a lot of times I've heard candidates go, well, man, I have all the things you're looking for, and yet I didn't get the job. So with that, what are other things, the types of things where people do not connect that you've seen pop up that are common problems in an interview?
With my experience, a common problem that I have seen is where candidates are not direct in their answers. So they kind of answer the question, but then the interviewer has to maybe ask the question a couple different ways to get the whole answer out. So maybe that's a disconnect in chemistry and how you communicate, right? So I've seen that happen a lot.
Do you feel that's listening or deaf?
It could be both.
Right.
It could be both. They could be so nervous where they're not listening well, or they could just not have prepared themselves enough to get in depth with the individual question.
Right. So candidates out there, if somebody's a great interviewer, they literally can ask you one question and you give an answer, and they can branch the entire interview off of literally that one question. And I know a lot of times we try to prepare for interviews in various ways and various topics, and my communication skills, my experience, my responsibilities, those types of answers. But at the end of the day, it's the interviewer that is outstanding of taking one question, you giving an answer, and literally having an hour interview off that one question. And the candidate's ability to go in depth and give and articulate really what they want to make sure their story represents and best represents them.
Correct.
Right. All right. So if you were to ask me some questions, I'm going to turn this back to you. This is now yours. This is
nice.
Bourbon. This is Rosé with
Skye.
Yeah. What do you have for me?
So what I'd like to understand is, what have been some of your key tips in addition to what we've already talked about that you provide to candidates?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is before you do, regardless of what you do in life, I think you study whatever you're getting ready to go into. So I believe in studying the company and knowing the company inside out. That's number one. Two, I like the I can't even say it, visualizing.
Visualization.
Yeah, they're not going to cut that. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Visualization. You know, it's like balance or balance.
Yeah.
No, but I do like the fact that you have to see what you're going to do before you actually do it, and then knowing your story. So we've already talked about those pieces, but I also think what's really, really important is knowing what you're about and the culture that you want to be in, the personal, professional, and financial approach, and really understanding why you are there. You know, everybody needs to know why you're there. And then finally, there's two pieces around questions. One is prepare how to answer the questions, which you've already alluded to, or SARS, which is situation, action, result. But more importantly, it's the questions you ask.
Yeah.
There's nothing that turns people off more than, hey, so we've gone through this process. What questions do you have for me? Well, I've interviewed with Skye and Mike. I'm done. They've already answered all my questions.
Yeah.
And worst case, if somebody's answered all my questions, I'm still going to ask you a question.
Same questions.
To make sure that everybody's consistent and they're telling the same story in a company, right?
Yes.
So, and then second, two questions that you're going to ask are the fact that I don't want somebody going in and asking questions about, hey, what are your hours? How many weeks vacation I did? Ask strategic questions about the company itself, how you can make a difference not only in the first 9 to 12 months in your role, but how what you do in that first 9 to 12 months in your role, how does that impact your overall organization? And how is that going to align with the vision from the CEO, the board, whomever, and the leadership? So that's the way I like to prepare my candidates.
That's good.
Yeah. And I know we also have we have a prep video, correct?
We do. But you know what else? Going into when you're preparing for the company, I think it's also important to prepare who you're meeting with, doing research on that
Absolutely.
individual,
Yeah.
seeing what kind of connections you guys may have, what you guys have in common. Not that you're going to go in there and have, you know, a bourbon with Bert, but you can be able to relate to that individual.
Well, there's so much data out there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to go meet with a CEO or a VP or a regional manager, et cetera, you already know that they have social as well, or most likely social.
Right.
At the very least, probably LinkedIn. The quicker you relate to somebody, the better you do.
Yeah, no doubt. Chemistry.
All right. Well, Skye, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Once again, folks, social, connect with us, see our links. And Skye, as we end and begin every episode, we end every episode with a cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. See you next time.